Hello and welcome to, I guess your own home. We're so glad that you've joined us tonight. Anyway, as you probably know, we're in the middle of a series on mental health and well-being, and we're looking at how you can look after your mental health in the same way that you would look after your physical health. If you've missed any of the weeks, there's been some really great stuff. So I'd really recommend just clicking the link below in the description there and catching up on the playlist. There's some good stuff. So I think we should do a quick recap. Just to remember where we're at. We've talked about how sharing where we're at is massively helpful, how looking after our mental health is just as important as looking after our physical health, and even how Jesus made that a priority in his life. We've talked about the effects of anxiety and how we can bring our worries to God. And last week we looked at panic, what that might cause, and how we can recognize and respond to it. So before we start this week's topic, I have a very important question to ask you. Have you ever watched a young child who's just learning how to tell jokes but doesn't quite understand how they work? Let me give you an example. Knock, knock. Who's that, son? The shoe! And then they burst out laughing as though nothing could be more obviously funny. And usually you'll see the parent laugh with them, if for no other reason than it's fun to watch them learn and to grow. I think we can be a lot like that with our mental health. We know that it's important. We try to understand what's going on in our own crazy little heads, but we aren't quite there yet. Our whole life is an opportunity to keep learning just how to be you, how to see what's going on in your mind and respond in healthy ways. Hopefully this series will help you on that journey. So this week we're going to be looking at depression. And I want to start by saying that it's a confusing term and it does get thrown around in a lot of different contexts. How about, my team lost again. I'm so depressed. Yeah, I'm actually really depressed, but therapy's helping. There's nothing to do. I'm stuck at home. I haven't seen my friends in weeks. This is so depressing. The Great Depression was the worst economic downturn in the history of the industrialized world, lasting from 1929 to 1939. Okay, so you probably aren't getting a financial crash and a mental health issue confused, but it does raise the point that the word depress essentially means to push down. So what actually is depression? Because it's not just being sad or down, though that can be part of it. We all feel sad and happy, bored, hungry, tired, scared, confused, frustrated, amused. Experiencing different emotions and moods is a natural, essential part of life. It's how we recognize if a situation is good, bad, or even dangerous. It's how we make sense of the world. And so if depression isn't just being really sad, then what is it? And here I'm going to come from a more medical source, because if you're looking for an expert, then I am probably not the guy to ask. Depression is a serious medical illness. It's more than just a feeling of being sad or blue for a few days. If you're depressed, the feelings don't go away on their own. In fact, they persist and mess with your everyday life. Symptoms can include feeling sad or even feeling nothing at all, losing interest in things that used to bring joy, overeating, not eating enough, not being able to sleep, sleeping too much, always being really tired, feeling hopeless, irritable, anxious, guilty, getting aches or pains, headaches, cramps, or digestive problems. And at its worst, thoughts of death or suicide. So guys, depression is a disorder of the brain. Our bodies produce dozens of chemicals called hormones to control how we feel, to tell us when we're hungry or tired or sad. If it relates to how we feel, there's probably a hormone involved. And depression can stop our bodies from making those chemicals or making too much of them. It creates a chemical imbalance, and that means normal patterns, the way our brain works, actually changes. It's not a character flaw. It's not a weakness. It's not a spiritual problem, and it's certainly not something you can just man up and power through. Asking someone to try not being depressed or to look on the bright side is about as helpful as asking somebody who's just been shot to try and stop bleeding. It's not helpful. It's not helpful. So when we have a problem with our physical health, we change the situation, don't we? We try doing things differently. We form better habits. We try and get more sleep and more exercise, or eating better, or we try and seek expert help. We go to a doctor if we're ill, or a physio if we've got muscle problems, or even a dentist. So if there's a problem with our mental health, we probably need to do the same thing, right? Well, yeah. There's absolutely stacks of evidence to show that being physically healthier makes us mentally healthier. But also, sometimes we might need to get extra help from a doctor or a therapist. It might even need medication, because remember, it's an illness. An illness, by the way, that almost 1 in 5 people will be diagnosed with over the course of their life. That's a lot of people. In fact, if there's around 20 of us watching tonight, then that would be 4 of us, statistically speaking, that is. So I guess what I want to say is that if at any point during this conversation now that I'm having, is it a conversation? At any point during the time I'm talking, or at any point in our conversation on Zoom afterwards, if you feel like that's where you're at, know that you're not alone and that there's nothing to be ashamed of. And please don't hide it. Talk to your friends or your parents or us as leaders. And if you're really worried, talk to a doctor. They'll understand and they'll know how to get you the right help. For many of us, we'll never be clinically depressed. Again, we'll experience times of sadness or grief or feel down for a while, but maybe not actually get clinically depressed. But that's not to minimize what you experience. When things are rubbish, things are rubbish. And in those moments of pain for us, being told to just stop bleeding, to just think happy thoughts, often being given advice or trying to solve the problem is unhelpful. And in this talk, I'm not going to come up with an all-encompassing answer. As with our physical health, it's sometimes best to direct your friends to doctors or other organisations instead. But there are a few things that we can do to help support people who are travelling that journey. Let's crack open the Bible, eh? So we're going to look into the story of Job. That's in the Old Testament. Or is it the Old Testament? It's in the Old Testament. See, Job was, well, he was a bit of a legend. He was well known to be a godly guy. He was living that sweet, sweet life. His business was booming. And then he loses everything. All of his possessions are stolen or destroyed. That includes his livestock, which were his entire life's work and his family's income. And then his sons and his daughters all die in a freak accident. And then he gets a skin disease so horrible that we see him covered in sores, lying in the dirt, scratching with a piece of broken pottery. He's distraught. He's grieving, and he's in pain. And then his friends come. And it all starts well. In Job chapter 2, verses 12 and 13, when they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. That, by the way, was a normal way to show grief in the culture they were in. So they weren't just being weird about things. They tore their robes and they sprinkled the dust on their heads. And then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. And no one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. So they came, they sat with him, they grieved with him, and they stuck around. So far, they're being pretty good friends. Really good friends, actually. But then they get less helpful. Job continues to struggle to come to terms with things. We see in chapter 3, verse 26, he says, I have no peace, I have no quietness, I have no rest, only turmoil. He's in a dark place, and rightly so. His life is falling apart. And then his friends go from sitting and being with him to trying to solve the problem by working out what he's done wrong, because, he's probably being punished for something, right? So in chapter 4, for instance, consider now who, being innocent, has ever perished. Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plough evil and those who sow trouble will reap it. The message that they were giving? Well, my dear friend, people usually get what's coming to them. You've probably done something wrong. So let's work out what it is, and then you can say sorry and everything will get better. Can you see how that wouldn't be helpful? The rest of the book of Job is this back and forth between Job and his friends being unhelpful, and Job and God listens and guides and actually honors Job for asking questions and kind of wrestling with the nature of life and suffering. So when we try and give advice to our loved ones, it's probably not that terrible. Certainly not as bad as Job's friends. But it's worth remembering sometimes that it's better to just be there, to listen, to keep making them feel welcome. And even if they're pulling away, to remind them of the truth, even if they can't hear it right now, that they are loved. Or if you need it right now, to remind you that you are loved. So what about you? What about ourselves? How can I help me? Because we will all have periods in our life where things aren't great. Even if you never suffer with clinical depression, you can still learn how to cope with bad situations. And whether you're depressed, down, feeling low, feeling fine, ecstatically happy, this is a practice you can do that can improve your life. Be thankful. Oh, sure, he says, be thankful. That'll solve everything. Well, a little bit, yeah. See, the more we understand about this, the more psychologists and scientists do the research, we see that people who are thankful for things, or people in their lives, are happier and healthier. And it makes sense. Have you ever noticed that you tend to go over and over the bad things and forget the good things? It's the way our brains work. It's actually a defense mechanism. It's how our brains try to avoid bad things by processing them and deciding how we can avoid, So we spend a lot of time thinking about them. But as a result, we spend very little time thinking about the good things. And most of the time, it doesn't actually help. So by hijacking our thought process with this positivity, we can change the lens through which we view things. There are studies that show that people who are more grateful have fewer aches and pains, are generally happier, become more sensitive to others' emotions, sleep better, have better self-esteem, and are more resilient when recovering from emotional trauma themselves. I mean, it seems like it's worth a try, right? So, let's do this together. For the next week, after you wake up and just before bed, take 2 minutes, 3 tops. I mean, more if you want to, but take 2 minutes and think of something that you're thankful for. Just one thing each time. Think of that one thing. Hold on to that thought. Hold on to that memory. Remember how that person or that thing or that food or that sport, whatever it is, remember how it made you feel. Remember how it improved your life. Relive that positive experience for just a minute. And then thank God for it. Thank God for putting that in your life. And then carry on with your day. Do that morning and evening. And we'll see what happens. I'll be trying it too. And I'm convinced that it will improve my outlook, even if things are tough. So we talk a lot about how God heals. And some of you will have seen it happen, even as we've prayed for people. We talk about God bringing peace and how we can bring him all of our issues and stresses and worries, and it helps. We talk about how God made us with a purpose and loves us and wants the best for us. And in all of that, in this context, it would be very easy to ask, why do I feel like this? Is there something wrong with me? Am I too broken? Am I unloved? Am I the only one feeling like this? I want to tell you right here and now, that is a lie. Don't let those thoughts take hold in your life. It's actually part of the big 3. You know, the big 3 that we talk about there. Read and listen, pray your thoughts, guard your heart. Guard your heart. Having spoken to wiser people than me, I can tell you that there's no simple cure. There's no pill that will solve it overnight. There rarely is in medicine. That goes for any illness. So to conquer this illness of depression, to beat this disease, can take time. When one avenue doesn't work, well, try another. Talk to your family or a leader, the doctor. Bring it to God. Keep communicating, keep processing, and keep learning how your brain works. Don't just avoid it. Looking back at the Bible, we can take a great lesson on how to look after our mental health from Jesus. There was a man who didn't avoid the problem. Jesus was a big fan of finding time alone to think and to pray, to chat to his dad. We see it many times throughout the gospel account of his life. Just after he was baptized, Jesus goes into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. He was fasting and praying and just working out what the next steps were, And in that moment, in that hunger, the devil comes and tries to tempt him, tries to tell him lies about his identity, about who he really is. If you really are the Son of God, turn those stones into bread. You must be starving. If you really are the Son of God, then prove it to everyone. Throw yourself off this high place. The angels will catch you. Tell you what, worship me, and I'll give you the whole world to rule as you please. You can do such fantastic things. You can find the story in Matthew 4. In it, we see that Jesus doesn't fight back in his own strength. He uses the truth of Scripture to protect himself. If, when you're down, or even depressed, you're beginning to believe lies about yourself or your situation, it could be helpful to go back to the truth that God has given us in the Bible. When you don't look the way you want, remember that he made you. When you don't feel that you're good enough, remember that he chose you. When you don't feel understood by those around you, remember that he sees you. And if you don't feel like you have the energy to go on, remember that he sustains you. And invite him into the moment. Remember that he's here, right here already, experiencing life with you, hanging on to your every word, like a parent whose child has learned how to tell jokes, but maybe not quite how they work yet. As Aaron said a couple of weeks ago, we aren't promised that God will immediately take away our problems, but we are promised his peace and his presence. If you ask him, God will meet you. He stays. He listens. He doesn't let you do it alone because he loves you. Father, thank you. Thank you that you created our brains to be complex and wonderful. Thank you that there are so many systems in place to help us process life and emotions and the bad and the good. We pray that in this coming week you would be with us, that we would know your presence. Amen. So next week, Chris is going to be sharing some practical resources and going over the last couple of weeks and answering any questions that you might have. So do remember to sign up because we're meeting in person at our city centre site. The link should have gone out to you via email. So check your email, or if you don't get them, badger your parents to make sure you're booked on. And yeah, let's jump over to Zoom now and we'll chat some more. See you there.